So it's not just a question of simply saying it is a shorter dissertation. The shorter dissertation has implications for the nature of knowledge that is developed by the doctoral candidate. And again, the talk component, it's fairly obvious. There is a connection, or at least I'm arguing there's a connection between the taught component and the type of knowledge produced by the candidate doing a doctoral degree. Okay. The introduction of professional doctorates, of course, also introduced another element, and this is the notion of the professions and the desire by some professions to secure a monopoly over knowledge and training within their profession. In other words, it bolstered, having the university on your side, through the development of professional doctorates, bolstered the idea of the profession controlling training, knowledge, and so on within the profession itself. Now, you might be thinking that's too simple. It is too simple. You're absolutely right. Because clearly the academy also has an agenda. The academy has an agenda about what should be in a doctorate, and therefore that might conflict with the notion of what the profession wants in the doctorate. Again, the idea of a monopoly, as in some professions, is not quite true. There are ways of, if you like, subverting the status hierarchies within particular professions. But that, in a sense, is the intention, certainly, of some of the professions. So we have this other element coming in to a professional doctorate, that is the notion of the profession itself. In education, you need to ask yourself, or we need to ask ourselves, I think, about the impact of, for example, the education doctorate on the education profession. Does it matter, for example, if you are a middle manager in a school and doing your professional doctorate, does it matter to, first of all, the school itself, and secondly, to your progression up the hierarchy of that school? It might do in some instances. It might impress some people. In the second instance, in the first instance, the practice that you are inquiring about might actually be improved in terms of the doctorate, the knowledge you developed on the doctorate. But it's not straightforward. There's not a straightforward connection between the needs of the profession and the professional doctorate itself. What I want to really talk about then is forms of knowledge developed on the various doctorates. And this is a very familiar, it's obviously not original. Many of you will be familiar with the work of Gibbons et al., who developed two notions, the notion of mode 1 knowledge and the notion, what they called mode 2 knowledge. And there are some clearly distinctive elements about the two. I suppose the old-fashioned, it could be called old-fashioned in a sense, knowledge developed on the PhD and by the research community within universities, within particular disciplines within universities. The knowledge was linear, causal, cumulative, originated in the university. So this is where knowledge was based and developed, applied to the practice setting. So there was clearly a division between the two. The one was developed here, if you like, and applied elsewhere. Certainly disciplinary sourced, reductionist, and clearly had, or clearly was of great significance in society. This was what knowledge was about. The university was about the development of knowledge. Now, what these people did, of course, was to develop or suggest a different form of knowledge development. Technology is autonomous, is not related, if you like, to the theory being developed by the practitioner in the university. It cuts across disciplines. So it's not just purely disciplinary knowledge. It's very much sourced through the practicum, through the practical situation or the workplace in which people are learning. It's much flatter in terms of its structures. And of course, it is transient. In other words, it moves on. it develops. And that's a very important point, whereas, of course, we are very much concerned in the university with the preservation of knowledge, and we do that in all sorts of ways, not least by publication, writing, and so forth. This type of knowledge is of a different sort, and it is characterized, I think, by those 5 particular characteristics. Now, the issues in relation to the professional doctorate and the practice-based doctorates, I think, can't be summed up. They're not all like each other. They're different. They have different characteristics. They have different epistemologies. That is, they have different knowledge bases. And also, there are different strengths, or at least some disciplines are keeping, if you like, a much stronger control over the type of knowledge developed in their professional doctorate than, for example, in others. And this won't come as any surprise to you. I suppose the natural sciences that have developed professional doctorates, or at least something like engineering, it's a much tighter, they have a much tighter control of knowledge, and also they have a much tighter control of the means by which that knowledge can be taught within the doctorate itself. So the engineering, they have a very clear view. There's a body of knowledge, the body of knowledge is passed on, if you like, and there is control from the discipline itself. Whereas something like education is much looser, has much looser boundaries. I mean, you could characterize it as perhaps not really knowing exactly where it wants to go. It's sort of borrowing, sort of clear-cut discipline, and therefore it has much weaker boundaries. And there are different relationships between theory and practice within the different professional doctorates. And again, I think that's a very important point. So again, we shouldn't simply characterize these sort of 3 types of doctorates as being very different. That is the PhD, that is the professional doctorate, that is the practice-based doctorate. There are differences, but it's not clear-cut. And again, the other marker of distinction between the 2 is a marker of distinction about the PhD contributes to the discipline, the practice-based doctorate contributes to the practice. Now again, that's very seductive as a theoretical or as a way of distinguishing between the 2. And I'm saying it's not quite as simple as that. It's much more messy, the relationships between these different bodies, the professions, the practical workplace, the university, and so forth. Okay, 4 modes of knowledge that I think can characterize these types of work done on doctorates. First is disciplinary, technical rationality, dispositional and transdisciplinary, and critical forms of knowledge. Very quickly, I'll talk about them. Disciplinary knowledge you are very familiar with, and there are pressures on people doing practice-based and professional doctorates to move towards a disciplinary orientation. Inevitably. There will be academics who will defend their discipline, who will say, the only justification for what I'm doing is because it is in the field of sociology. Okay, you're doing a practice-based doctorate, it doesn't matter. It's sociology, it's the field of sociology that matters. I mean, that in a sense ignores all the problems with what is the field itself, the notion of a field of sociology and so forth. So there is a strong sense of disciplinary knowledge which influences the work of students on all sorts of doctorates. Now, technical rationality is different because there's some movement towards practitioner knowledge, some acknowledgement that practitioner knowledge is important, is the base for the knowledge being developed by the student on the degree. So practitioner knowledge is understood very much as context-based, problem-solving, contingent, non-generalizable and transient. It's very different from the sorts of problem-solving that goes on within the discipline itself, which has a much stronger, if you like, theoretical basis. Here it's very much about the movement within practice or within the profession. Third form